Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, May 25th, 2023. The U.S. House legislative work week ends without a deal yet between the White House and House Republicans to raise the nation's debt ceiling to avoid a default and tied to federal spending limits that the Republicans want. Coming up, an update from President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, plus we'll talk with a reporter with the Hill, Alexander Bolton, and with a reporter with MarketWatch, Gregg Robb, about Wall Street's reaction to a potential default if there's no debt limit increase by, the Treasury Department estimates, early June. U.S. House today passing a bill to classify all fentanyl substances as Schedule 1, meaning they have no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. The White House supports this bill. President Biden nominates to be the next chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Air Force General Charles C.Q. Brown, calling him a warrior descended from a long line of warriors, and he says he knows what it means to be in the thick of battle and how to keep your cool when things get hard. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announces that Denmark and the Netherlands will lead the effort to train Ukrainian pilots to fly the F-16 fighter jet, now that the decision has been made to supply Ukraine with the modern planes to continue the fight against Russia's invasion. Plus, Microsoft President Brad Smith on how artificial intelligence should be regulated to prevent abuse, and NOAA provides an Atlantic hurricane season outlook. From Reuters, U.S. President Joe Biden and top Republican lawmaker Kevin McCarthy are edging close to a deal on the U.S. debt ceiling, with the parties just $70 billion apart on discretionary spending, according to a person familiar with the talks. What is likely to emerge will not be a hundreds-page-long bill, something that could take lawmakers days to write, read, and vote on, but a slimmed-down agreement with a few key numbers, this source and another person briefed on negotiations said. That from Reuters. President Biden spoke about the debt ceiling talks today at the White House.
Speaker McCarthy and I have had several productive conversations, and our staffs continue to meet as we speak, as a matter of fact, and they're making progress. I've made clear time and again defaulting on our national debt is not an option. The American people deserve to know that the Social Security payments will be there, the veterans' hospitals remain open, and that economic progress will be made, and we're going to continue to make it. Default puts all that at risk. Congressional leaders understand that, and they've all agreed there will be no default. And it's time for Congress to act now. Now, I want to be clear that the negotiations we're having with Speaker McCarthy is about the outlines of what the budget will look like, not about default. It's about competing visions for America. Under my administration, we've already cut the deficit by $1.7 trillion in our first 2 years, but Speaker McCarthy and I have a very different view of who should bear the burden of additional efforts to get our fiscal house in order. I don't believe the whole burden should fall on the backs of middle class and working class Americans. My House Republican friends disagree. Instead, Republicans passed a bill that would make huge cuts in important programs that millions of working and middle-class Americans count on. Huge cuts in the number of teachers, police officers, Border Patrol agents, and increased wait times for Social Security claims. And I won't agree to that. I put forward a proposal that will cut spending by more than $1 trillion that freezes spending for the next 2 years. That's on top of the nearly $3 trillion in deficit reduction I previously proposed through a combination of spending cuts and new revenue raisers. I propose making the wealthy begin to pay their fair share, which will reduce the deficit, but it won't cut programs for hardworking Americans depending on it, those funds, in order to continue big tax returns for the wealthiest Americans, America and America's largest corporations. But we can reduce the deficit both in short term and long term with a combination of spending cuts on programs that help big oil and big pharma by closing tax loopholes and making the wealthy pay their fair share. I've reduced the deficit, I said, $1.7 trillion in my first 2 years without raising a cent and raising taxes above anyone making less than $400,000. The economy is growing. The only way to move forward is with a bipartisan agreement, and I believe we'll come to an agreement that allows us to move forward and that protects the hardworking Americans of this country.
President Biden in the White House Rose Garden today. Up on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Congressman Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, who is one of the negotiators on the debt limit for the House Republicans, spoke with CNN reporter Manu Raju.
How are you going to get this done by June 1st? How's that possible?
One thing you didn't say in there. There is a bill that has passed the House that sits in the Senate.
Yeah, they're not moving that. You know that. So, I mean, there's not going to be able to get this done by June 1st.
I sat down with the president February 1st. We passed the bill in April, long before they ever set the deadline was June 1st. Republicans have done everything they can.
We have still fundamental disagreements we have to resolve, and it's complicated. The fundamentals of this deal are about spending. The fundamentals of the deal are based off of the legislation the House passed to raise the debt ceiling, and that's tough stuff for Democrats, and the White House has made that very clear. But these are thorny issues that have to be resolved.
It's like the spending levels are not resolved yet.
Nothing's resolved.
Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, and before that, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, interviewed by CNN reporter Manu Raju, who tweeted his interview clips. They were on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building. The U.S. House has finished all non-debt ceiling-related legislative work for the week, the Speaker telling members they can go back to their districts for the long Memorial Day holiday, but be prepared to return to Washington, D.C. within 24 hours for any votes on a debt limit increase and budget agreement with the White House. Speaker McCarthy also standing by his pledge that members will have 72 hours to read any agreement before the final vote on the House floor. At the end of today's legislative session, many House members of both parties coming to the House floor to talk about the debt ceiling talks. Here is Republican Chip Roy of Texas.
You see this ominous threat of a looming debt ceiling date, an X date as it's being referred to, of June 1, is all manufactured crisis and theater. We know that. Americans know that. Secretary Yellen wants to figure out how we need to deal with whatever interest payments need to be paid in June. She can prioritize those payments. She can make decisions to figure out how to carry this country forward. She can walk on down here, brief us, meet with us long before the June 7th date she's currently planning to come down to talk to us, and have a conversation about, I don't know, how about taking those COVID dollars back that are sitting there unobligated to the tune of $50 billion? How about taking the IRS dollars back that are there to expand the Internal Revenue Service, an IRS which, by the way, targets the poor and minorities 3 to 5 times more than the non-poor and non-minorities? That's the truth. Why don't they take that $80 billion, combine it with the COVID money, turn it into dollars right now that you can go pay loans with? Voila, no problem. But see, my Democratic colleagues won't do that, because my Democratic colleagues prefer the fear created with a manufactured crisis. They prefer to use that crisis, as Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. They prefer to manufacture a crisis to jack up more debt on our children and grandchildren to the tune of $4 trillion. That's what they want more than anything on earth, is to spend more money to increase the power of government, to undermine our freedoms, to destroy the American way of life, and they are doing it right now. That's what's happening.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, a member of the Freedom Caucus, today on the House floor. Also talking about the debt limit negotiations, Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat from California.
I rise to urge my Republican colleagues to come back to work now to responsibly avoid a national default, just like they did 3 times under President Trump. Instead, as the U.S. is on the brink of defaulting for the first time in history, House Republicans have recessed for the weekend, holding the global economy hostage and threatening a catastrophic recession if they don't get to impose cruel cuts on American workers, families, veterans, and seniors. The mere threat of default will cost workers close to $20,000 out of their retirement savings. It would also send interest rates skyrocketing, cost small businesses $2,500 more per month for capital, and force Californians to pay almost $300 more per month on their mortgages. Republicans already voted to spend the money. Now they're trying to walk out on the bill and leave the most vulnerable Americans out to dry. That's inexcusable.
Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat from California, on the House floor. An article by The Hill's senior staff writer Alexander Bolton begins with time running short and the danger of a national default growing. Democrats are hoping an unlikely savior will come to the rescue, the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. Alexander Bolton joining us now by phone. Thank you so much. Senator McConnell has said publicly that he's staying out of the talks. What are the House and Senate Democrats you've been talking to saying about trying to get him in?
Well, what's interesting is that you have Democrats who are both very progressive and then who are also close to the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, saying that what they call reasonable Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, can't keep their heads stuck in the sand. They need to participate here. And essentially what their message is that Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker, is not a reliable negotiator. He is too stuck on his position. He is under too much pressure from conservatives in his caucus, who could call a snap election on his future in leadership, that a deal just isn't likely. And so they're saying that Mitch McConnell needs to get involved. And I'm talking about Rep. Pete Aguiar of California, the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. The Senate Democratic, he said Senate Republicans are putting their heads in the sand if they think that the extremists in their party will have a change of heart. And then you have Rep. Pramila Jayapal from Washington, leader of the House Progressives. She says time's beginning to run out. She says that, quote, reasonable Republicans and Mitch McConnell need to get involved and get people to understand that a default on America would be terrible. So they're trying to put the pressure on McConnell to get involved, and I think the political tactic here is to try to portray Kevin McCarthy as an unreliable, unreasonable negotiator who will not be able to cut a deal with President Biden to avoid a default.
What are you hearing about how close to a deal the White House and the House Republicans are? They keep holding the private meetings, and then some of them come out and speak, and we're trying to read the tea leaves.
Well, I think what's interesting is that on Thursday morning you had Kevin McCarthy and you had other House Republican sources putting out essentially the message that these talks are making progress, that they are getting closer to a deal, and it generated some buzz on Thursday morning that there could be a deal as soon as maybe Friday or the weekend. There could be even a vote next week. And so, that's surprising given how far apart the two sides are. But I think McCarthy wants to put a positive spin on the talks so that people do think that they're making progress. And so I think what he's trying to do is blunt the calls by the House Democrats, for instance, to either go the route of the 14th Amendment or to deal directly with Mitch McConnell in the Senate. He's saying, hey, I can get something done. I feel good about getting something done. Now, let's not forget, he had a similar message just about a week ago before the president left to Asia for his trip, and those talks then stalled over the weekend and collapsed. So I think there's a momentary burst of optimism, but my prediction is that we're still a few days away from a deal, but we'll just see what happens.
We're talking with the Hill reporter Alexander Bolton. Is it looking like any deal that the White House negotiates with the House Republicans will need a bipartisan vote in order to pass the House and possibly the Senate?
Well, absolutely. I mean, no deal that the president is going to agree to is going to get enough Republican votes to pass the House. I mean, keep in mind, Kevin McCarthy's operating with a very slim majority. So for this deal to pass the House, and it's certain to disappoint Republicans who in their own debt legislation passed in April, they're calling for $4.8 trillion in spending cuts. The president's not going to agree to that. So what the president agrees to will be far short of that. That's going to turn off many conservatives. So there will need to be a good number of Democratic votes in the House and, of course, in the Senate as well to get this bill passed, if, in fact, there's a deal.
The members of the House and are now going home for the Memorial Day holiday recess. What's the timing on possibly getting them back?
Well, they've been told that they are subject to being called back to Washington. They've been told that they will be given 24 hours notice to get back to Washington. They've also been told that they will have 72 hours to review the bill before a vote on the floor. There was some, I'd say, happy talk about a potential vote next week. But I think a deal is going to be difficult to come by. One of the late sticking points is whether the discretionary caps that House Republicans want, discretionary spending caps, would also apply to defense programs. And I think that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. Democrats, if defense discretionary is not affected, and if defense discretionary is in fact capped or cut, then that's a very tough vote, a very tough pill to swallow for Republicans who think the nation's defenses should be the top priority.
Alexander Bolton, senior staff writer at The Hill. You can find his stories at thehill.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, tweeting today, "I will use every procedural tool at my disposal to impede a debt ceiling deal that doesn't contain substantial spending and budgetary reforms. I fear things are moving in that direction. If they do, that proposal will not face smooth sailing in the Senate." That tweet from Republican Senator Mike Lee. Republican presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, former governor of Arkansas, was on C-SPAN's Washington Journal this morning, and we asked him what he would do if he were president now about the debt ceiling.
How would you handle the debt talks that are happening between Speaker McCarthy and President Biden right now? Do you agree with Republicans on the spending cuts?
I agree with the Republicans that the president should agree to a framework for bringing the excessive federal spending under control. That is important, and President Biden should simply say yes to that. Yes, we're going to work together and we're going to reduce spending down the road because it is in an uncontrollable state right now. You know, you can negotiate the terms of that framework, but it is important that you establish that framework for reducing spending.
Well, would you agree with this offer by the White House yesterday, which was to freeze spending for 2 years? That nonpartisan group estimates that could cut deficits by as much as $1 trillion over the next decade. Would you take that offer?
Well, I'm not going to get into the nuances of that negotiation now. I think that the Republicans look at that and say, is this the right framework for controlling federal spending? And so give them the flexibility to negotiate that. What's important is that, one, we have to extend the debt. It's a legitimate debt of the United States. Secondly, we need to have a framework, some controls over spending in the future. This is what happened during the Obama years, and this is not perfect at all. Whatever they agree to is going to have some difficult challenges for our budget, but it's a necessary belt tightening. And so the lesson to me is start earlier. Let's try to avoid brinksmanship. And as president, I would try to work with Congress to make sure they pass their budgets, that they do their work early on, and that the president submits the budget on time as well. If you set that example, then we're not going to leave it to the end in terms of hurting our reputation across the globe as to whether the question is whether we're not going to pay our debts. That's not a good question even to ask or to be in the newspapers and in the media.
Republican presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, former governor of Arkansas, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal Friday morning. You can find our full discussion with him at our website, cspan.org. An article at MarketWatch on the debt ceiling negotiations has this paragraph: if the talks collapse and the government breaches the debt ceiling sometime in early June, the Fed will reluctantly move to center stage. Joining us now on the phone is the author of that article, Gregg, Robb, senior reporter for MarketWatch. Thanks for doing this interview. What might the Federal Reserve do?
I think the first thing to do is to say what they probably won't do, and they won't cut interest rates. You know, the thing that people think about, the rate is, they've been bringing it up. It's just a little bit over 5% now. And it's not the kind of a thing they're going to want to do to bring it down. Instead, they're going to use their tools to put liquidity in financial markets. So that's the focus.
What has been the stock market's reaction so far to this brinksmanship, and what would their reaction be if there was actually a default?
So far, the market has been kind of jaded, I guess cynical. They think that mainly everyone thinks that they're going to come to a deal. It's an interesting question. We'll see what happens if the market, what would it take to get the market to really spook? In 2011, with the last time, there was a big crisis. There was a big market reaction when things started to go sour. I don't know exactly when that was, but that's the kind of thing that people are wondering. already things are starting to move. Treasury debt is more expensive now. So there's a little bit of disquiet coming sort of like every day.
There have been dire warnings, besides the stock markets, there have been dire warnings about what would happen to the economy if there was a default. Are those warnings justified?
I think so. One of the things, the interesting thing I read the other day that's interesting is the government sort of has to act like it has a balanced budget. So government spending at the federal level, at least, is going to really dry up. And that's part of GDP. Every time we look at the GDP numbers, we look at the government's contribution. So the economy right now is not really too super strong. It's just a little bit over 1%. Doesn't need much to throw it into a ditch. So when you look at the numbers, you think that it's going to go into a ditch if this happens. And if consumers, especially in 2011, I'm referring back to then, again, the last one, consumers got really kind of spooked. They didn't like it at all. They stopped spending. So that's another thing that would put us in a ditch.
Would there be any long-term consequences if the default happened and then eventually they do raise the debt ceiling? People not trusting government securities anymore?
I mean, there's a lot of speculation about that. I mean, the short answer seems to be yes. I mean, the U.S. market is like the gold standard. It's as I read just the other day, that it's the golden goose, right? We get so many benefits from we have the dollar, it's the global currency. So that means our debt is the global debt. We get so many benefits from that. It's the golden goose. And so we're going right for, killing the golden goose. So there's like not anything good that's going to happen. Just to get back to what the Fed will do, the Fed is going to try to look at the markets. They're going to try to minimize this. They're going to try to make the markets and the investors think we're going to get through it. They're going to put up some bridges. Hopefully, the Treasury probably won't default on any debt. People using the word default a little bit loosely, like the defaulting on debt doesn't seem to be an issue until July, at least like late July. So there is some time here, some wiggle room here. The worst thing that would happen is financial markets, investors, especially foreign investors, sour on the U.S. And that would be a really bad thing.
We're talking with Gregg Robb from MarketWatch. You have a quote from Fed Chair Jerome Powell in your article at MarketWatch.com. No one should assume the Fed can really protect the economy and the financial system. Are there people out there assuming that?
I think that's why he said it. I think that there are people who think that. I mean, right, the Fed can do a lot of things. They've got it. They helped us get through the financial crisis. They helped us get through the pandemic. They spent a lot of money. They propped up markets. They bought a lot of securities that nobody wanted. They can do things to mitigate some of the turmoil. We don't know how big a wave it's going to be, and they think, the wave could be too big for them. So they have to say that, and especially for the economy too. If the economy goes into the ditch, they can't really stop it right away. So, and the plus that they're in the political spotlight. There are some people on both sides. If there's some people in either party or think that they can get political advantage from this, they're not going to want to see the Fed step in and mitigate it. So that's why the Fed's kind of in a hot seat. Like, they're going to try to do as little as possible here. They're going to kind of hold their breath and hope that people kind of, cooler heads prevail and that we can get through this. But they're kind of readying a playbook to help if need be, because it's important for everyone.
Gregg Robb is a senior reporter for MarketWatch. His story is at MarketWatch.com. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
On Wall Street today, the Dow down 35, NASDAQ up 213, S&P up 36. A story from CBS News. The House on Thursday approved a bill that would classify all fentanyl as a Schedule I substance, the most dangerous classification of drugs. The GOP-led legislation, backed by the White House, passed the House 289 to 133. Classification of all fentanyl substances as a Schedule I drug, currently only some fentanyl-related substances are Schedule I, will allow for tougher penalties and spur more research related to a drug that has claimed thousands of American lives. Schedule I drugs do not have any medical use and are highly lethal. That from CBS News. The bill's sponsor, Morgan Griffith, Republican from Virginia, on the House floor.
Everyone in this body knows someone who's been affected by the drug overdose epidemic. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in 2022, there were more than 107,000 overdose deaths in the U.S. 67% of those deaths involve synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Right now, fentanyl analogs are considered Schedule I substances, but only because of a series of scheduling orders which expire on December 31st, 2024. Since we put that temporary order into place, we have seen a reduction in the trafficking of the fentanyl analogs into our country. According to a 2021 GAO report, fentanyl analogs coming into the U.S. dropped by 90% in the year that we did the temporary scheduling. This bill aims to curb overdose deaths by permanently scheduling fentanyl analogs as Schedule I substances. This will strengthen law enforcement's ability to prosecute fentanyl traffickers and act as a deterrent. The HALT Fentanyl Act also promotes research. This is something new. Research by removing barriers to the research. In the Energy and Commerce Committee, we heard that there are as many as 4,800 potential analogs. Our experts at NIH, FDA, and other agencies have studied roughly 30 of the 4,800. By encouraging research of Schedule I substances like fentanyl analogs, we can better understand how these substances work and how we may prevent potential harmful impacts in the future. Because fentanyl has a proven medical use, fentanyl itself has a proven medical use, it is considered a Schedule II narcotic. But illicit derivatives of fentanyl, also called fentanyl analogs, currently have not demonstrated medical value. Let me be clear. This bill will have no impact whatsoever on a physician's ability to administer fentanyl in proper medical scenarios. HALT deals specifically with fentanyl analogs, not fentanyl itself. The DEA has said that permanently scheduling fentanyl analogs is their top legislative priority. We must not allow this temporary extension to expire. On Monday, the Biden administration released a positive statement regarding the bill. In the statement, they supported the provisions I just described, permanent scheduling and streamlined research. The Biden administration did recommend a few other items they would like to see related to fentanyl analogs, and I'm open and willing to have these discussions, but that is not this bill. Madam Chair, we should vote to advance this bill that we agree on and that does help stop the bad guys, particularly those bringing these substances over the border.
Congressman Morgan Griffith, Republican from Virginia, on the House floor. He mentioned the bill is titled HALT Fentanyl Act, HALT standing for Halt All Lethal Trafficking. Opposing the bill, Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager-Dubb of California, a Democrat.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to strongly oppose the Republicans' HALT Fentanyl Act. Republicans want to ban American history so that they can repeat the bad parts. Did we learn nothing from the war on drugs? I guess not. Real talk, it was a huge failure. Back then, we enacted ineffective and punitive laws that only worked to expand mass incarceration, mostly of black and brown folks. This legislation will enact ineffective and punitive drug laws that only work to expand mass incarceration. Who will suffer? Mostly black and brown folk, while the data shows that all races are facing challenges with fentanyl. This legislation would put us on a dangerous path toward unjust and disproportionate mandatory minimums for the possession of all fentanyl-related substances. Newsflash, research is still needed on possible and legal pharmacological use of these substances, and fentanyl is still being prescribed legally and used in controlled settings by medical doctors. But that's right, Republicans don't like science. In its current form, this bill allows for no flexibility and won't address the root issue. This bill is short-sighted because some of these substances could still be key to developing treatment for fentanyl overdoses. So instead of learning about how we can save people from fentanyl, we want to criminalize all of the fentanyl-related substances. 97% of the illicit fentanyl seized at the border is seized at legal ports of entry. The majority of those convicted are U.S. citizens. The draconian mandatory minimums proposed under this plan don't address these issues. In fact, this bill doesn't do anything smart. It doesn't address the humanitarian crisis we are facing at our southern border. It doesn't address the epidemic of substance abuse, and it certainly won't improve our public safety. The majority of people who are dying from fentanyl are dying because they are taking it illegally. They are buying, searching for illicit drugs. It's not about prosecution, it's about drug use. The issue is substance abuse.
Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager-Dove, Democrat from California, on the House floor. The House passed this bill. Again, the vote was 289 to 133. Voting yes, 74 Democrats and almost all Republicans. One Republican voted no, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who tweeted, "Instead of passing bills that expand the failed war on drugs, we should be focusing on regaining operational control of the border. Additionally, one-size-fits-all mandatory minimum sentences are unwise, and this bill increases the number of defendants subject to them." The bill now heads to the Senate. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern, important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. A few more headlines from Associated Press. Oath Keepers extremist group founder Stewart Rhodes was sentenced on Thursday to 18 years in prison for orchestrating a week-long plot that culminated in his followers attacking the U.S. Capitol in a bid to keep President Joe Biden out of the White House after winning the 2020 election. Stewart Rhodes, 58 years old, is the first person charged in the January 6, 2021 attack to be sentenced for seditious conspiracy, and his sentence is the longest handed down so far in the hundreds of Capitol riot cases. And the Supreme Court on Thursday sharply limited the federal government's authority to police water pollution into certain wetlands, the second decision in as many years in which a conservative majority narrowed the reach of environmental regulations. President Biden nominating today Air Force General Charles C.Q. Brown, currently the Air Force Chief of Staff, to be the next chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Brown, if confirmed, would replace Army General Mark Milley, whose term ends in October. President Biden making the announcement of the nomination in the White House Rose Garden.
I have the honor of introducing my nominee to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, Jr. General, welcome. General Brown's a warrior, descended from a proud line of warriors. His father, a U.S. Army Colonel, C.Q. Brown, served in Vietnam. His grandfather, U.S. Army Master Sergeant Robert E. Brown, Jr., led a segregated unit in World War II. And the command pilot, General Brown, brings to this role more than 3,000 hours of flying experience, including 130 combat hours. He knows what it means to be in the thick of battle and how to keep your cool when things get hard. Like when your F-16 was on fire. And you returned to the base in Florida in 1991, CQ had to eject more than 300 miles an hour, landing in the Everglades. That's a lot of fun, huh? Well, I tell you what, he was back in the cockpit the next week with a new call sign, Swamp Thing. New call sign. I asked him inside the Oval what it was like, but I'll tell you about that later. General Brown is also a warfighter who's commanded in Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. And he has an unmatched firsthand knowledge of our operational theaters and a strategic vision to understand how they all work together to ensure the security for the American people. And while General Brown is a proud, butt-kicking American airman, first and always, he's also been an operational leader in the Joint Force. He gained respect across every service from those who have seen him in action and have come to depend on his judgment. More than that, he gained the respect of our allies and partners around the world, who regard General Brown as a trusted partner and a top-notch strategist.
President Biden in the White House Rose Garden with the nominee. If General Brown is confirmed by the Senate for the position of Joint Chiefs of Staff chair, he'll become the second black chairman of the Joint Chiefs after Army General Colin Powell. It would also be the first time the U.S. has had a black Joint Chiefs of Staff chair and black Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin serving at the same time. A CBS News article includes this. General Brown's confirmation could be delayed by Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, who has been blocking the Senate confirmation of hundreds of senior military promotions to protest the Pentagon's policy on abortion-related travel for service members. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and the current Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair, General Mark Milley, met today virtually with the defense ministers from the 50 nations comprising the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. And after, the two U.S. leaders, held a news conference at the Pentagon. AP writing that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Thursday that European allies are developing a coordinated program to train Ukrainian forces on the F-16 fighter jet. But Pentagon leaders warned that it will be a costly and complex task and won't be a magic solution to the war. Senator Austin said the allies recognize that in addition to training, Ukraine will also need to be able to sustain and maintain the aircraft and have enough munitions. And he said air defense systems are still the weapons that Ukraine needs most in the broader effort to control the airspace. That reporting from AP. Here's Secretary Lloyd Austin at the news conference.
During today's meeting, several allies and partners also discussed plans for training Ukrainian pilots on fourth-generation fighter aircraft, including the F-16. And planning and executing this training will be a significant undertaking, but the coordination of this contact group will help make that possible. And I especially want to thank Denmark and the Netherlands, which have decided to lead a European coalition in providing F-16 training for Ukrainian forces. In the coming weeks, my Dutch and Danish counterparts will work with the United States and other allies to develop a training framework. Norway, Belgium, Portugal, and Poland have already offered to contribute to training. And we expect more countries to join this important initiative soon.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at a Pentagon news conference. Standing beside him, General Mark Milley, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A reporter asked them both about reports earlier this week that armed soldiers attacked over Ukraine's northeastern border into Russia. Ukraine says the soldiers were independent, pro-Ukrainian Russian nationals belonging to two paramilitary groups. Russia says the raid was done by Ukrainian saboteurs that used U.S. military vehicles such as Humvees. Here's the question to the Defense Secretary and the General.
Next question will go to Idris Ali, Reuters.
Chairman Milley, it's been several days since the attack and incursion into Belgrade. There have been social media images, videos, and pictures showing U.S.-made military equipment and vehicles being used in it. After your conversations with the Ukrainians and your own intelligence means, were U.S.-made military vehicles used in that incursion, and how did the militia get them? Did the Ukrainians provide them with those vehicles and equipment? And Mr. Secretary, this incident and other recent incidents, including the drone attack near the Kremlin, has that raised concern for you that the Russians could use incidents like these as a pretext to broaden the war? And have you talked to your Ukrainian counterparts about potentially limiting the attacks that they're carrying out closer to their borders or within their borders for the time being?
So I'll just very briefly just let you know that I've got the staff looking at that with UCOM staff to confirm it tonight. So I don't have an answer for you right this second. The rules that we have established with the Ukrainians is to not use U.S. supplied equipment to attack into the geographic space of Russia. And look, they're a country at war. It's an existential threat. They're fighting for their survival. I can't say with definitive accuracy right this minute to you whether that, and I saw the same videos, whether that's U.S. supplied equipment or not, what was the nature of the attack, who did what to whom. I can't say that with definitiveness right this minute. But I can say that we have asked the Ukrainians not to use U.S. supplied equipment for direct attacks into Russia. Why is that? Because we don't want, this is a Ukrainian war. It is not a war between the United States and Russia. It's not a war between NATO and Russia. This is a war between Ukraine and Russia, and we are supporting in supplying and help training and advising and assisting Ukraine, but it is not a direct conflict between the United States and Russia.
I can't say it any better than that, Idris, in response to the question that you asked me. In terms of any kind of pretext to broaden the war that Russia would make use of, I don't want to speculate, but I will tell you that we are focused on giving Ukraine, providing Ukraine the capability it needs to be successful in defending its sovereign territory. And that's a conversation that we've had with our counterparts on a continual basis. We've engaged a number of times on this issue just to make sure that to the chairman's point, we are not at war with Russia. This is Ukraine's fight. Our goal is to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure Ukraine is successful.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and General Mark Milley, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, at a Pentagon news conference. Story in the Washington Post, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy surprised graduates at Johns Hopkins University on Thursday, appearing in a live stream at their commencement ceremony. He told the crowd that time is of the essence and urged them not to waste it. He told them he was proud that Ukraine is not losing a single day in its defense against Russian aggression.
You have to know exactly why you need today and how you want your tomorrows to look like. You have to know this when you are a politician and have to achieve a certain goal for your country. You have to know this when you are a soldier and you have to defend your position so that the whole country is protected. You have to know this when you just have to go through life. Sometimes, however, when you are young and when you are a student, you still need to waste some time. What is life without it? But only sometimes, and when no one else depends on you. I'm proud that Ukraine is not losing a single day in its defense against Russian terror. Every day we do everything to become stronger, to give more protection to people, to save more lives. The United States has also not lost a single day in helping Ukraine repel the Russian aggression. President Biden, a strong bipartisan coalition in Congress, and most of all, the American people have, like the generations before them, risen to this occasion and are leading the free world to secure freedom in Europe.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy giving a virtual commencement speech to the graduating students at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. The school awarded him an honorary doctorate. This is Washington Today. Story at the New York Times. Microsoft endorsed a crop of regulations for artificial intelligence on Thursday as the company navigates concerns from governments around the world about the risks of the rapidly evolving technology. Microsoft, which has promised to build artificial intelligence into many of its products, proposed regulations including a requirement that systems used in critical infrastructure can be fully turned off or slowed down, similar to an emergency braking system on a train. The company also called for laws to clarify when additional legal obligations apply to an AI system, and for labels making it clear when an image or a video was produced by a computer. They're reporting from the New York Times. Microsoft President Brad Smith laying out these points in a speech in Washington.
But the truth is, in many instances, we don't need new laws. We have the laws in place. What we need to ensure is that those laws are applied properly to the new technology that's being created. Think about the world in which we live. It is unlawful for a bank to discriminate on the basis of race in deciding who should get a mortgage. If a bank relies on AI to make that decision for itself, I cannot imagine a day when an attorney will have a good moment in court if she or he stands before a judge and says, "Your Honor, a machine made us do it." That is not a defense to a legal obligation. But what we're going to need to do is help customers like banks understand how to ensure that they are using AI in a manner that meets their legal responsibilities. We're going to have to help courts and judges learn. We're going to need regulatory agencies with AI specialists so they can analyze the software that is being used, whether it's a new drug, a new airplane, a new car, or anything else in everyday life. And then there's a second layer, the layer that we're all quite rightly talking about, the regulatory architecture for pre-trained AI models. There's a certain class of powerful models. We'll have to decide exactly what the definition is. But as Sam Altman said before the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee last week, we do need new law in this space. We would benefit from a new agency here in the United States. We should have licensing in place so that before such a model is deployed, the agency is informed of the testing. There are requirements it needs to meet for safety protocols. There need to be measurement. And ultimately, like so much else in life, whether it's an airplane or an automobile or, frankly, oftentimes new foods that are created, AI will require a license. And we need to make sure that licensing can move forward quickly so that we don't slow the pace of innovation, but we can do that and ensure responsible conduct at the same time. And once one has a license, one's obligations don't end. There should be ongoing monitoring and reporting. There needs to be disclosure to the government about issues that arise. And we would say for these most powerful models, they need to be deployed in a safe place. That's why we would say they need to be deployed in a data center that has been authorized and licensed itself for precisely this kind of use.
Microsoft President Brad Smith, a speech in downtown Washington, D.C. Microsoft released a 5-point blueprint for governing AI. You just heard Brad Smith talk a bit about the law and regulation part. His other points: implement and build upon government-led AI safety frameworks, require safety breaks for AI systems that control critical infrastructure, promote transparency and ensure academic and public access to AI, and pursue new public-private partnerships to use AI as an effective tool to address the inevitable societal challenges that come with the new technology. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration saying that this year's Atlantic hurricane season will produce an average number of storms. Hurricane season runs from June 1st through November 30th. The NOAA Administrator, Rick Spinrad, with the update.
NOAA is predicting a near-normal 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. Specifically, there is a 40% chance of a near-normal season, a 30% chance of an above-normal season, and a 30% chance of a below-normal season. For the range of storms expected, NOAA calls for the following: 12 to 17 named storms with top winds of at least 39 miles per hour. Of these, 5 to 9 are forecast to become hurricanes with maximum winds of at least 74 miles per hour. This includes 1 to 4 major hurricanes ranking as Category 3 or above and winds of at least 111 miles per hour. Before I close, I'd like to take a moment to remind you now that it's time to prepare. Remember, it only takes one storm to devastate a community. Regardless of the statistics I shared, if one of those named storms is hitting your home, your community, it's very serious.
NOAA Administrator Rick Spinrad at NOAA Center for Weather and Climate Prediction in College Park, Maryland. A Reuters article today reads, last year broke a 6-year string of above-normal hurricane seasons, with the strongest that year being Hurricane Ian, which spawned 150-mile-per-hour winds that hit Florida and South Carolina. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.